following program may not be suitable for all audiences and has been rated C for creepy and chilling. The views and opinions of the Darkest Hours hosts and creators do not necessarily reflect those of Neo Retro FM or its affiliates. Neo Retro FM does not assume responsibility for the Darkest Hours content or its residual effects on listeners, including nightmares, disturbed rest or unsettling images planted in your head. The time to change the station or leave has now come and gone. And now, we present The Darkest Tower with your host Amanda Jane, here on Neo Retro FM.
For self for tomorrow, we embark on the darkest hour.
Evening, everyone, and happy Friday. Thanks for joining me, Amanda Jane, for The Darkest Hour. Some of tonight's stories take us through spending time in the woods, time with friends, while others seem to take us through time itself. All very mysterious and entirely terrifying. So, let's get started, shall we? This was a very long time ago in Tacoma, Washington, when I worked at a place that was called Cameo Theater. I remember it was the month of April. The year was 1976. I can't recall exactly the time, but I know that it was past 10 as the theater was closed for the evening. Doors locked, sign off. But likely before 11, since I was closing up the till and was normally done by that time. As I was closing, I kept noticing the same man, an army man in uniform. That was not the unusual part. In fact, our theater chain showed fairly tame adult films, catering largely to the military population, from what was known as just Fort Lewis at the time. No, the unusual part was that the same man appeared to be walking the same block half a dozen times or more. He seemed to be making his way back around rather quickly. Probably lost, I said out loud to myself. That was common as well. Most people on the base weren't necessarily from here. My coworker was also my ride, so once I finished up the till, I waited for him at the front desk, and I kept watching the man. He kept doing the same thing, walking around the block, but then he stopped walking. He looked around for a minute before landing his sights on the theater. He then turned his body and began to cross the street. Then, the strangest thing happened. Everything outside, in the street, it seemed to get blurry, as though my eyes went out of focus for just a moment in just that spot. And the next thing I knew, the man was now standing in front of the ticket counter, inside the theater lobby. He suddenly looked wobbly, like he couldn't keep his balance. He was holding his head and hunching over. I gasped and he didn't react, just stayed hunched over, rubbing his forehead. I wasn't sure what to do, and I kept hoping my coworker would just show up at any moment. The man finally looked up at me, and he seemed as surprised as I was. "Sir, how did you get in here?" I asked the man. He just looked at me, then looked back at the doors, back at me. He didn't say anything, like he didn't know the answer. He started to walk toward the counter, and instinctually I backed away. I guess a little more afraid, I asked again, "Sir, how did you get in here? Are you okay?" He looked up at the wall behind me, trying to focus on the clock hanging there. As he got even closer, he started to mutter, "What time is it?" I didn't even answer the man. Instead, I grabbed my stuff and walked into the back room where my coworker was. I told him that there was a guy in the lobby, that I had no idea how he got in, and that was all I could get out before he started running for the front entrance to meet the guy. When we got out there, the man was just standing at the front desk, and before he could say anything, my coworker grabbed him by the arm, pulled him toward the entry, unlocked the doors, and shoved him outside. Before coming back in and relocking the doors, he told the guy that we were closed and to get out of here. He came back inside, and we waited in the lobby for the man to leave. He just stood there, looking bewildered, rubbing his head, staring up at the open sign, which was not illuminated. And as he does this, I start to tell my coworker how the man just sort of appeared in the lobby, after just moments before being all the way across the street. The doors were locked from the inside and outside, so to get in, you'd need a key, and to leave, you need a key. The man still hadn't left, and it was getting to be almost midnight, so my coworker unlocked the door again, opened it, this time saying, "Look, I don't know how you got inside with the door being locked, but you better leave right now. The cops are on the way." The man still looked confused, but slowly started to walk away. We hadn't actually called the police, but it did seem to get the guy to leave. To this day, I still don't think that the man meant any harm. In fact, I don't think he even has an explanation for how he got into the theater that night. And I'm not sure which one of us was more afraid. When my boyfriend and I first got together, we went camping regularly. Same routine, different friends each time, usually 2 or 3. And we'd go to the large ancient forest that surrounds our town. We went several weeks running. A lot of places, especially the woods, within rural areas, house a lot of stories, urban legends, and this place was the same. We grew up hearing stories of murder, suicides, even witchcraft. But as I said, we went frequently and never had any bad experiences. In some places, we'd see litter, which was a shame, but for the most part, it's such a large space that we rarely saw anyone or much of anyone. We would go in, find a new spot, set the tent up while it was light out, have a barbecue, some beers, maybe smoke, then respectively go our separate ways for the night and eventually sleep. One trip, we all decided to venture out into the woods a little bit more, to explore. One of the 3 friends didn't want to go with us. Their reasoning being that they didn't want to leave all of our stuff at the camp, and they didn't really like the idea of wandering the forest. Basically, this individual was reluctant to join us on this occasion to begin with. So, we didn't expect much from them on the trip, but to not even like the forest, why go camping? Anywho, the rest of us decided that we would fill a couple backpacks with some beers, waters, joints, snacks, and we'd just return later if we needed more supplies to keep us entertained. The forest had a lot to offer, and I instantly was stoked on our choice to explore. We found a little waterfall with a small stream. We heard some rustling. Scared us at first, because we didn't expect to hear noises or footsteps, but it turned out to be more majestic than anything. A couple of deer making their way to the same stream for a drink. After appreciating the sight for a moment, we kept walking, and my boyfriend noticed some carvings on various trees next to us. Some of them looked more artistic than others, like they'd taken their time. Simple, but nice. Some were just statements like, "So-and-so was here," things like that. We continued to walk, admiring the trees with the markings. We found ourselves walking into an open area where someone had set up some benches with some fallen tree logs, and a podium-looking thing in front of the benches. I recalled my elementary school having this same type of setup. It was outside behind the library, in a little wooded area that was kept by the developers that were building the school. I always thought it was super cool, and I loved when we would read out there. We sat around on the logs drinking, smoking, just talking for a while. We all decided we wanted to cook up some hot dogs and get back to camp before the sun officially set. We returned to our tents at dusk, and when we did, I found a small stick figure made from twigs at the entrance of my tent. I honestly sort of laughed it off, thinking maybe our friend got bored or found his sense of humor while we were gone. There didn't appear to be any reason to be afraid at this time. We'd just spent the day drinking in the woods and hadn't felt anything strange. I went to show the figurine to everyone, particularly the friend who chose to hang back, but when I approached him, he turned strange. I held up the figure to dangle in front of him, and he closed his eyes before turning away and asking me to please move. And as I did, he started to walk toward the forest. Every one of us was now looking at each other. This was so strange. He'd opted not to go into the forest during the day with his friends, but now, looking petrified, he was headed straight for it, in the dark. One of our friends ran after him, at which point he turned around and said, "Please, I'll be back, just leave me alone for a minute." They stood there for a moment, but he turned and continued to walk, disappearing into the dark. We sat there a moment in silence, and just as I was going to ask if we should try to reach him or go after him, we started to hear singing. It was unclear who was singing, but it was singing, coming from somewhere around us in the forest. And for some reason, this made us all laugh, breaking the silence that we'd been sitting in for too long. The singing eventually stopped, and not long after our friend left, he came back. He was in better spirits and was actually making an effort to hang out with us, saying that he just needed to walk around for a bit. No big deal. All good. It started to rain heavily, so we decided to call it a night, all retreating back to our tents. When we did, we heard the singing again. And after a moment, we heard our friend yell from his tent, "Okay, guys, it's not funny." Nobody else said anything after that, and the singing stopped, so I think we all just fell asleep. The next morning, I started a fire to make some breakfast before we hit the road. We were all talking about the night before. My boyfriend brought up the figurine that I'd found in front of our tent. When he did, our friend snapped back, "Dude, it wasn't funny yesterday. It's not funny now. I told you guys I hate the woods. That's messed up." I interjected, asking what he meant. That I thought that he had placed it in front of my tent as a joke. I explained that we didn't put it there or anything like that. And this is when things that were funny got terrifying. When we were all out on our exploration, our friend said that he went to take a nap. He kept hearing noises, someone walking around the camp. He thought it was us, but after no one answered, he left his tent and started to look around for us. He saw that things looked like they'd been moved around, but when he realized that no one was there, he went back to his tent. And when he did, he found a small figurine made of twigs in front of it, just like the one that I found. He said he spent a good amount of time trying to laugh it off, walking around exclaiming, "Okay, you guys got me." But after so much time had passed, he started to get creeped out, retreating back to his tent as to not feel like eyes were all over him. He said he knew someone was still at the campsite, and for a while. He peered through the grainy opening and could see someone on the other side of a tree, carving something into it. He said that he really hoped it was just us, messing with him and then hiding to watch his reaction. He said he didn't know if he was more scared or just annoyed that We were messing with him for so long after he'd asked us to stop. As he said the part about the carving, our eyes made their way to the trees surrounding our tents. They had the same shapes as some of the figures carved into the trees that we'd seen on our walk. We all had that bad feeling, realizing that someone else had been in our space, and possibly still were. So we pretty much rushed to get out of there. I put out the fire. We all did one last check to see if we were leaving anything behind, threw the tents in the back of the van, and just as we were about to pile in, I heard my boyfriend say, "What the f***?" as he opened the driver's side door. He found that there were 2 very dead squirrels, one on the front seat, one on the driver's seat. They had been cut open and just left on the seats of the car. I actually didn't scream. I felt like screaming inside, but instead I said very calmly that we should use some garbage bags to remove them, cover the seats, and get the hell out of there. Now. This was probably just people, but any kind of person that mutilates animals, well, those are not the kind of people that I want to be anywhere near. Needless to say, we don't camp in that forest anymore. About a month ago, I took my kids to ride dirt bikes on one of my favorite trails. My oldest son was leading, youngest following him, a friend behind him, and I hanging behind them all. As I come over a hill, I see my youngest son with all of his gear off, including his jersey. I came up asking what was wrong, thinking that he might have crashed, but he said that it had felt like something grabbed him off of his bike and that now his back was burning. Confused, I looked around and made my way to him. And I saw that there were 3 scratches across his back. They looked like huge claw marks. No blood, but very distinct. He'd had on a chest back protector, so there's no way that a tree branch or anything got him. We finally got him geared back up and we headed out. About 30 minutes later, we reached a spot where we always stop for a break. I asked for him to take off his jersey so that I could see the scratches again. They were completely gone. Every time I think of this, I get scared all over again, even though it happened a long time ago. I grew up in a 4-story building. The first level was a pharmacy, the second level was another family home, the third was our home, and the 4th level was used for storage, for unwanted furniture. So no one lived above us. My father traveled a lot for work, and he didn't spend a lot of time with us, so for the 24 years that we lived there, my mother, my brother, and I spent the most time there. It all began with hearing the sound of furniture moving, late at night, midnight, sometimes 3 in the morning. My mother had assumed that it was the building owner and that maybe he was moving things around. She had talked around with the neighbors and thought it was strange that they lived beneath us and had never been able to hear us moving around. Even stranger, the building manager was not in town when this happening occurred. Then there was the sound of table cutlery moving around, as though it was being used. No explanation as to where this sound was coming from. One night, in our room, I shared a room with my younger brother. I woke up around 3 in the morning, and the moment I opened my eyes, I saw a dark silhouette standing in the space between our 2 beds. I could move my body, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. Another night, I woke up again around the same time. I went to use the bathroom, and to get there I had to pass our kitchen. We had a large farm-style sink, and in front of it I saw the same dark shadow that I'd seen in my room just the night before. It was only there for a few moments before darting away. Things escalated a bit. I started seeing white shadows forming in our room, and then leaving our room and going to the living room. I wasn't always alone. My little brother would see these things too, and I knew my mom felt something was going on, right from the moment that we heard furniture move. One weekend, my uncle agreed to paint the home's interior walls, as long as we, the kids, were out of his way. Since my grandma only lived a few blocks away, we all went and stayed with her for the weekend. On the first night, at around 3:30 in the morning, there was a ring at my grandmother's door. It was my uncle, who came in looking very scared, hollering that he would never go back to our place, and that he didn't even finish the job, that he couldn't finish the job. When my mother asked him why, he answered that he was seeing white shadows coming from our bedroom and going to the living room, and that it sounded like furniture had been moving around, all on its own. To this day, I have no idea what those shadows were, or why the 4th floor always sounded occupied. I'm just glad that it never tried to hurt us. So, I believe this was a UFO sighting right before a power outage. I attached a link where you can see what I'm referring to, but here's the story. Last night, my mom and I were sitting on the back deck, smoking a cig, talking. I see a glowing light in the sky, so I point it out to my mom. Then we both home in on it, in awe. Our jaws actually open. It was stunning, and it looked like a flame. What was so odd is that it looked so much like a flame, in a lantern. We sat there for over 30 seconds, still, completely in awe and in shock at the flame in the sky, flickering but still hovering in one position. I pulled out my phone, and when I did, my mom and I saw that the flame started to bounce. As I turned on my camera and started recording, it immediately changed, and we were even more shocked when the lantern's flame began spinning into a perfect circular orb. Not even 5 seconds later, the orb shot up from its previous hovering position into the clouds, at which point both my mom and I felt our ears start to ring, and we went inside. Probably about an hour or so later, the orb came back. I took the video again, and upon it disappearing, our ears started to ring again. And then the power went out. The dogs went crazy. We heard sirens around our neighborhood. And when we stepped outside, 2 of our neighbors were out there, saying that they caught the orb in the sky just before the power went out. They saw it disappear, but hadn't seen it since. They also said that they hadn't seen any of the police or emergency vehicles that we could hear all around us. We went back inside, where we found our dog barking at the kitchen, standing just outside of its archway. As I approached the kitchen, a small bright orb caught my vision just out of the corner of my eye. But when I quickly looked over, there was nothing, and my dog had stopped barking. The power came on hours later after we'd already fallen asleep. There was nothing about this on the news, and the outage didn't have any explanation attached to it other than a description of unexpected outage within our area on the service map. Thoughts?
You are listening to The Darkest Hour, only on
Neo Retro FM, live from Olympia, Washington. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Modern music programming. NeoRetroFM.com.
We'll be right back.
I wanted to take a moment to talk about something my husband Ryan and I and our band Forget Me Not are doing this summer. We're teaming up with the Foundation for Edmond School District and their Nourishing Network program to support students and families in need. We kickstarted our campaign by releasing our latest single, Sweetest Thing. All summer long, we'll be donating 100% of music-generated proceeds to the foundation. You can help just by listening to our music. So, for all the details, be sure to follow us and visit our website, conductedbyforgetmenot.com. If you wish to donate or get involved with the foundation, please visit foundationesd.org. Help make No Student Hungry a reality.
And now, we continue with our stories.
Growing up, I had a friend. We'll call her Dee. She would wake up screaming from dreams that she had sometimes. She would tell me that they were demons, pretending to be angels, and that they would visit her in her dreams. Now, I'll be honest and say I didn't really believe my friend, as she was pretty much afraid of everything, like to the point of having all the lights on in the house when we're sleeping, 24/7. Sort of annoying for sleepovers, but nothing a sleep mask can't help with. I thought it was just night terrors and that her struggle was with sleep, not demons. Being neighbors, like most girls our age, Dee and I hung out at each other's houses a lot. At Dee's house, there was one room that I didn't really like. I couldn't explain the feeling that it gave me, but it would ultimately give me an experience that would make Dee's claims of demons seem more valid. It was their laundry room. They had an extra smaller room to fold laundry next to it, and it was in the basement. We didn't go in the basement a lot unless we wanted to play on their computer. I always tried to bring board games over, suggest Barbies instead of computer games. This was because every time we went into the basement, the laundry room, folding room, gave me the creeps. I constantly felt like something was watching me from those rooms. One night, I didn't know where my friend went after we'd come in from playing outside. I called out her name as I got inside the door, and I heard Dee shout from the basement, "I'm down here." I followed the voice who I thought was Dee. I get to the bottom of the stairs and I start to get a really strange feeling, like something wasn't right. I call out for Dee again. No answer. I turn to go back upstairs and all of a sudden, I hear my name being whispered. "H, come down here." I turned and looked around. Nobody was down there. I hear it again. "H, come here." I shot back upstairs and never went into that basement again. Dee said that she had gone into the bathroom, but was upstairs lying on the living room couch, waiting for me to come in from outside or to call her name. That's when I started to believe her and genuinely started suggesting more sleepovers at my house. I swear, there was a demonic presence trying to interact with us or have us invited in. I worked the night shift, or night audit, as we called it at this semi-swanky hotel next to the airport. One night, I got a call from a lady in room 404. She says that there's arguing, loud banging, and crying coming out of room 406. I checked the computer. No one has checked into that room due to maintenance issues. I called my supervisor to see what I should do, and she tells me to call on-site security to follow them up with a key. I called on-site security, who asked that I also call 911, as that was actually the protocol in the event of criminal activity. I called the police, and security met me in the lobby, where I followed him to the 4th floor. As we got off the elevator, we heard the crying. It was loud. My heart started to race, and the security guard asked me for the key, so I handed it over. The next few minutes seemed to happen in slow motion. He opened the door and immediately flicked the light on. As we enter the room, the shower is on. Steam is coming out from under the door. There's only one lamp on in the room, and it's very cold. There's a lady with super red hair, curled up, crying on the bed. She's facing away from us. She sort of stops crying and rolls over. And when she did, I felt a wave of horror. She was super pale, covered in blood, and was staring just behind us. That's when we realized the shower had stopped and the door was open. As we turned around, we saw that there was now a 6'5" man standing in the doorway. But we could see just behind him that the cops had arrived. And as we moved to the side to get out of the way, the cops tased him, and he hit the floor. We stuck around to give a statement, and we saw that he was arrested on the spot. Turns out, the hotel had hired a convicted sex offender who was working maintenance at the hotel and working on room 406. The woman had been staying in a different room on the same floor. She was attempting to get into her room when someone came up behind her, grabbed her by the throat, and dragged her to that room. She said that he had a knife and he was going to kill her. At one point in a struggle, she managed to get a hold of the knife and stabbed him through the hand. He regained control of the knife and cut her across her arms before taking off to the bathroom. Moments later, we came through the doors. All I could think was, thank goodness for people who call the front desk. Honestly, I'm not sure what would have actually happened had no one brought attention to that room or to that maintenance man. I stopped working at the hotel that month. It always felt off after that event. This was back in 2008, mid-February. I decided to drive down Piney Hollow Road in Winslow to New Jersey. Apparently it had one of the infamous blue holes located off of that road. I was getting ready to move out of state, and I wanted to do something related to the Jersey Devil. And supposedly, that's where he lived, along with a lot of other strange things. So I turned off onto a dirt road, continued to drive down a little, but then I stopped. I knew that you could only drive so far. There were signs posted everywhere, and I'd known people that had gotten stuck out here before. I'd come by myself, and I didn't want to get my car stuck, obviously, so I parked and decided to sit in it and smoke a cigarette, just to figure out a game plan. How was I going to get to the water or the blue holes? When suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, on the left side of my car, I see something huge, like taller than my car, whip by real fast into the woods. At least I thought. I know I saw something, but where did it go? What was it? There was no sound. I couldn't hear anything. No wind, nothing. You could hear a pin drop. That's how quiet it was. So, I'm about to get out of my car when I hear this deep voice say,
Get out.
It was right next to my ear, as if someone was leaning in the driver's side door and said it right there. No one was around. I looked around frantically, and still nothing. But then, I heard scratches coming from the top of my car. And then I heard much louder, a yelling, say,
Get out.
I somehow managed to turn my car around relatively fast and hightailed it out of there. I moved back to New Jersey a couple of years later, and I haven't been able to go back. Scared the crap out of me. My first mistake was insulting it. My friend had mentioned that she had a Ouija board, so I asked her to pull the board out so that I could check it out. At first, she said no, but then she agreed to do it as long as she didn't have to participate. After she had the board set up, I asked, "Is there anyone in here?" Nothing. So, being a stupid teen, I said, "If anything is in here and not talking, you're a coward." Nothing. The board was put away after that. Fast forward to about a week later, and I'm sleeping upstairs on my couch. I wake up on a stereotypical stormy night. Thunder, lightning, wind, rain, the works. I look around to see why I woke up, but I couldn't see anything, so I decided to fall back asleep. After laying there for about 30 seconds, I hear from downstairs, "Get the boy." I open my eyes and listen. Nothing. I start to go back to sleep. "Get the boy" is much louder this time. And then my downstairs door slams shut. I freaked out because nobody slept down there. And with the storm, we had 0 windows open for a draft to make its way through. I just laid there for hours, and I know it sounds crazy or lame, but I basically asked the board for forgiveness that night. Just apologizing for insulting it, promising to never use one again, to always take it seriously. Who knows what happened, or if that worked, but I never heard anyone whisper or yell again. And I'll never touch a Ouija board again. My mother grew up in rural Alabama and Florida in the 1920s. She told a lot of stories of a lot of people and events that took place back in those days. Most of them interesting, but ordinary events. But one day, she told me a story of an unusual event that she had directly experienced as a young girl, along with about a dozen other women and children. I remember this event well, even after all these years, she would say, precisely because it was so unusual. In those days, she told me, rural Alabama was still kind of backward. She meant little electricity, with horse and wagons being the only transportation for many farm folk. It was a bright summer day, early in the morning. She and the other woman gathered on the front porch of the Aldridge farmhouse. They'd go there to shell bushels of peas and beans for preserving and also just to chat as they worked, the younger children playing in the yard. Mr. Aldridge came out to the porch and told Mrs. Aldridge that he was going to town on business. Mr. Aldridge saddled up his horse, and as he rode through the big gate directly in front of the porch, Mrs. Aldridge reminded him to bring home a big sack of flour. He answered her with a grunt and rode off. About mid-afternoon, they were still on the porch, shelling peas. They looked up and saw Mr. Aldridge approaching the house. The road leading to the house came off the main road, and it was about 300 feet long and ran directly up to the porch, so they could see him coming quite clearly. Thrown across the saddle in front of him was a large white cloth sack of flour, and cradled in his left arm was a brown bag of other groceries. They watched as he rode up to the gate, and he stopped there, waiting for someone to open it. One of the boys ran to the gate and opened it. Then, in full view of all the women and children, Mr. Aldridge vanished. He just disappeared instantly. They sat there for a second, astonished, then terrified. They all began screaming. After a few minutes, they had managed to calm down, but were shaking and still confused. My mother explained that they just didn't know what to do. So for a while, they just went back to shelling peas. But all of them, the children too, huddled up on the porch, while Mrs. Aldridge made one of the boys close the gate. About a half hour later, they looked up and saw Mr. Aldridge, again, riding toward the house with that same white sack of flour across the saddle in front of him and the same brown bag of groceries in his left hand. Again, he rode up to the gate without a sound and stopped. None of them had the nerve to run and open the gate. They were all too afraid to move. They just sat there, staring at him, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, to their relief, Mr. Aldridge spoke. "Well, is someone going to open the gate for me?" You see, somehow, Mr. Aldridge got there before he arrived, my mother would say. This is a story or experience my aunt has told our family for years. And since it's pretty unusual and a bit haunting, I thought I'd share it here. My aunt's sister, also my dad's sister, died several years before I was born. She had struggled with drug addiction her whole life and eventually lost her life to an overdose. At the time, prior to her death, she was living with a boyfriend, and my aunt who tells the story was about 14 at the time and living with their parents. Also my dad, who was just 3. He doesn't have a lot of memories of his sister or these events. My aunt said her sister would sometimes sneak up the escape ladder and come to her and her brother's bedroom window in the night, sometimes staying there for the whole night, telling them stories until they all fell asleep. It had been several nights since my aunt's sister had come home or come to the window, and she was very worried about her. She would constantly wake up and look at the window to see if her sister had arrived. Slowly, nights turned into over a week, and my aunt was beside herself. One night, really struggling to fall asleep, she found herself drifting, and now she was dreaming. And in her dream, she saw her sister walk through the bedroom door. And instantly, my aunt began crying and asking why she hadn't come to see her, why it had been so long. Her sister walked to her bed, reached over, and gave her the strongest hug she'd ever felt. She smelled so nice and looked so pretty, my aunt thought. And as she thought this, her sister leaned back and said, "Don't worry, baby. I'm okay. I'm free. I'm so happy. And you're gonna be okay. I love you, sissy. I love you so much." My aunt said that after that, she felt her sister's weight leave her body. Then, she kissed her forehead, kissed their brother's forehead, my dad, and continued to walk out of the room. The next thing my aunt knew, it was morning time. When she walked into the living room, her father was sitting at the table with a policeman. She learned that her sister had died sometime in the night from a drug overdose. Someone called the police early that morning to report that a woman wasn't breathing, and gave the address to the boyfriend's house where she'd been staying. I suspect that my aunt will continue to tell this story her whole life, as clearly it's left a sort of haunting impact on her. I know that it gives me chills every time. This was back in the late 90s. There were 5 of us out in the Pine Barrens in Jersey, or simply known as the Pines. I guess it was around 11:30 at night when this happened. A few hours earlier, we'd driven down this long, unmaintained dirt track, surrounded by tall grass, a lot of trees, and further out, swamp-like bodies of water. We stuck to the path, followed it essentially to the middle of nowhere. We reached an open spot with no other way to go forward and only to go back. We decided to park so we could hang out. We'd all gotten out of the car to just sort of walk around the area, talking, stuff like that. We weren't being particularly loud, but it's pretty quiet, except for us. I happened to glance down the pathway which we came in. There's a pair of headlights coming down the track toward us. But there's no sound of an engine. It's moving too fast for a walker, too smoothly for a runner, and the ground's too soft and muddy for a bike. And yeah, they were definitely headlights. Not flashlights, not fireflies, not anything else but headlights. A half second after I spot the whatever it is, I notice that everybody else is staring down the track too. The woods are now absolutely quiet, and the headlights are getting nearer and nearer. I lose my nerve and bolt away from the middle of the road, diving behind a convenient bush. My friends all immediately following suit behind me. We crouched down and just peered through the leaves, waiting for the car to pass. It doesn't. We watch as the headlights turn left and disappear. Thing is, there aren't any turnoffs on that road. We gave it a couple of minutes and ran to check down the pathway. There was definitely no place for a car to turn off. There were no tire tracks over ours no disturbance in the tall grass that surrounded the path. And there was no sound of a car anywhere, and no taillights. We were all pretty shook, so we piled into our car and got the heck out of there. We've talked it over, on and off over the years, and we've all agreed that we definitely saw a car, and that the car we saw didn't exist. My husband and I lived in the deep woods of East Texas, near a tiny place called Mount Sylvan. I had been having some medical tests done at a small hospital nearby. It had been 3 days in a row, and I had had the same routine. I'd park in the small parking lot, walk through the double doors leading to the first floor cardio testing area, turn right at the gift shop, sign in at the desk. No stairs, just a simple route from the parking lot to the lobby. I always exchanged some casual conversation with the same young and very pleasant blonde receptionist. There was a small seating area across from the reception desk, and behind her desk were the doors that led to the lab. Today, the doors were open, and I could see that there were seats in there. But I recognized the chairs. They were the exact chairs, even the same color, that I saw my mother sit in for her chemo treatments. She'd passed away a year before. I'd even heard a patient in the lab comment on the new chairs as I was signing in. A nurse replied that the hospital's oncology department had donated them. This was sort of gut-wrenching, as I felt they could likely be the same chairs, and I decided to sit in the ones across from her desk, as to not see through those doors. Eventually, I was called back, did my blood work, and left the same way that I came in. A couple of days later, my husband went back to the hospital with me to hear the test results. He had never been there before. We followed my usual routine. We parked in the small parking lot, walked through the double doors leading to the first floor cardio testing area, turned right at the gift shop, and there was no check-in area. I stood there and stared, totally shocked. No desk, no chairs, no blonde receptionist, no doors to the lab. I started to walk up and down the hall searching for my check-in area, but it was nowhere to be seen. A doctor walked by, noticed my confusion, and asked what I was looking for. When I told him that the place I usually checked in at was missing, he laughed and said that it had moved to the second floor 3 years ago. When we made it to the second floor, nothing was familiar. This was the first time I was in this particular office, but actually the fourth time that I'd been there this week. I have no explanation as to how the hospital managed to have my test results, or how the doctor recognized me when I didn't recognize them. Luckily, I didn't have to go back to the hospital after that, but it gave me a whole new fear of the doctor's office. That's for sure. This happened a long time ago, in Indiana, when I was in the Boy Scouts. We were headed to court in Indiana, which is also known as the original state capital. It's really close to the Kentucky border and about an hour and a half away from Indianapolis, which is where we lived. The place was sort of boring, lots of old buildings, some other groups of kids that were possibly doing the same things that we were. We finally reached what was our last stop on the tour, and it was the Corden Capital State Historic Building. It was creepy. Just an old brick building with small windows that looked like they had bars over them. The other places we had looked at, they all seemed to be next to each other. Several buildings, but almost connected. This building was sort of in front of them all, with no others on either side of it. The building was our groups to explore for the next 20 minutes, so we began walking the lower level. And I noticed that it sounded like people were above us, which I thought it had to be somebody that worked there. Kept walking around, rather bored. Me and one of my friends decided to sit at the bottom of the stairs, waiting for the rest of the group so we could go upstairs. A couple other boys joined us, and we got the okay from our scoutmaster to head up, as long as we were careful and didn't touch anything until the rest of the group got there. We all turned in excitement and made our way up the stairs to the kitchen. But we were stopped in our tracks by a lady in red. She flew past the top of the kitchen stairs and disappeared into another room. We just sort of stood there a moment, but one of the boys screamed, and when he did, the rest of our group promptly left the second floor stairs, tumbling down the stairs as fast as we could, almost falling over each other. Our tour was cut short, and we headed back home. Quite a few of the boys were making fun of us, laughing about how ghosts aren't real, and that we didn't see anything and just wanted to leave because we were scared. Well, for those of us who were on the stairs, we saw something real that day, even if it was a ghost. Okay, my little scaredy cats, that's all the time we have for this week. But be sure to join me every Friday night at 11 p.m. only on neoretrofm.com. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandajanefmn@gmail.com. Stay spooky.